Hello, and welcome to episode 13 of Project Slave 1. The sharp-eyed among you may have noticed something different about the intro. It now features my all-new Slave 1. And that's what this video is mainly going to be about. My award-winning Slave 1 got a lot of interest after the last video, and is now sold. In fact, it sold within the first 24 hours of the video going live. I'm really pleased it's now gone to a good home with a passionate collector, where it'll be treasured for many years to come. So now I have space for a Slave 1 entirely of my own design, but more on that in a minute. To celebrate the success of Project Slave 1, I've designed some merchandise, which is on sale now through my online store. There's a link in the description to the store, where the designs are printed on demand and shipped worldwide. There aren't just Slave 1 designs on there, but dozens of others based on aircraft and tanks, with new designs being added all the time. As you can see, Project Slave 1 clothing all have front and back prints, and there is even a mug with a wraparound design. The basic design is taken directly from the all-new CAD files you'll see later in this video, so it's pretty accurate. The front design features the classic Mandalorian helmet and Boba Fett's sigil, the Mythosaur. I'm not sure how long my Slave 1 designs will be around if the mouse gets to hear of them. So if you want some Slave 1 merch, I'd suggest you order pretty soon, just to make sure you don't miss out. I got some samples printed, which took about a week to arrive, and I was delighted with the quality. Unfortunately, my top fashion model is on holiday, so this is the best way I can show you what I got. I went for the premium grade of clothing and got a men's t-shirt, a hoodie, and a woman's long sleeve top. The fabric's really soft and the print quality is great. Both the t-shirt and long sleeve top are both 100% cotton, which makes them really comfortable. The hoodie is a mix, but it's really cozy. I love it. To get the right size, it's recommended that you measure an item of clothing that fits you well. I just took a chest measurement and everything fits me perfectly. I would recommend hand washing these at 30 degrees to preserve the design and minimise shrinking, as they are cotton, just to make sure they last as long as possible. The mugs are only suitable for hand washing, but they look very cool. If you'd like to see some more designs, put your suggestion in the comments and I'll see what I can come up with. Don't forget the link to the store is in the description, and get them while you can. I'm not sure how long they'll be available. Okay, now for the main event. I'm now pretty familiar with Slave 1 and have collected as much reference material on this crazy ship as I can. From the Empire Strikes Back sketchbook with the early concept drawings through to present-day publications. Star Wars Chronicles has the best reference by far of anything from the movie franchise. This is where I found the excellent views of the side, front, back and top of Slave 1. These views are the foundation on which my Slave 1 is going to be built. Sculpting a Galaxy is a terrific book, but it isn't as in-depth as Star Wars Chronicles. The photos are bigger, which does help, especially with excellent photo of the underside of Slave 1, which makes replicating this area of the ship a lot easier. I bought this book, Star Wars Complete Vehicles, which is fascinating and has some well thought out solutions for how these ships were constructed and function. But it got me thinking, this is just one person's interpretation of these awesome ships. We know little about how they function, with the only certainties being the movies and the studio models. The remaining gaps we fill with our imagination. Slave 1 is a crazy design, as are many ships in the Star Wars universe, and as I've said before, it poses a lot of questions. The Mandalorian Season 2 and the Book of Boba Fett both gave Slave 1 a fair chunk of screen time, which was really good. I have tried to recreate the rotating interior from the series, but have found it to be quite impossible from an architectural point of view. It's fine to say, oh yes, the interior just rotates, but making it work in the real world is a whole new ballgame. Ryan Church came up with some great concept art for the interior, and we'll be looking at that in more detail later. So here's my strategy for designing Slave 1. I'm going to try and recreate the exterior as closely as possible to the original. This shouldn't be too hard, as I have plenty of source material to work with. The only limitation will be my own ability, which, bearing in mind I'm self-taught, could be a problem. The inside is a different matter altogether, as there's no definitive interior, so I figure my design should be just as valid as anybody else's. This I'm creating from scratch, but I want it to be functional and appropriate to Boba Fett. At the same time, it must fit in the Star Wars universe in terms of style. Then there are of course the grey areas, such as the inside of the lower skirt, where there is no detail on the model, but something would exist in reality. Again, the addition of credible detail has to be carefully considered. The original studio images of Slave One are the best reference, and give me a great silhouette to work from. You have to be really careful here, as there's inevitable distortion from the camera, which makes the views of the front and the back harder to interpret. The wings aren't too distorted, but the hull is much harder to read with any certainty due to perspective. We have to remember that this is a hand-built model, put together quickly with no CAD design or 3D printing. As such, some of the parts aren't straight, and the symmetry is slightly out in places. Just look at the main entry door. Don't get me wrong, I think it's a brilliant model, and I would have cut off my right arm to have worked on it back in the day. Although having only one arm might have restricted me a bit. Studying Star Wars Chronicles, I found a reference to the actual size of the original model. This was great news. It allowed me to work out how big to make Slave One, what scale it was, and enlarge the main side view photo to the correct size for reference. Now I could make a start. I wasn't going to be using anything from the Gambody model, just the wings, cockpit and underside details that I'd already created. But I did need an all-new main hull. This was really going to push my skills, trying to recreate the complex curves and then add the pattern of the panel lines on the surface. This is something I wasn't looking forward to. Finally, I had to fill in the gaps to pull Slave One together into a credible design. And after several months, yes months, this is what I came up with. These are the basic views in my CAD software. There are hundreds of parts of this CAD model, and I've been meticulous in my attention to detail, both inside and out, but let's see it in 3D. The underside you will have seen before, but I've now worked up a better solution to the vents at the back of the rear skirt, near the boarding ramp. Detail panels have also been added to the inside of the skirt. Just small, credible details, as I mentioned earlier, that fill in dead space. The main hull is now a better silhouette and has panel lines and details added to replicate the original. The panel lines were a nightmare to add. I dare say that within days I'll find out a much quicker method, but this is how I spent my Christmas. But I loved every minute. My original concept for the rotating cockpit remains, with a few modifications, but we'll take a closer look at that later. So how does the all-new Slave One match up with the original photo? Well, I'll leave you to decide. That's pretty close. I'm happy with that. Let me know what you think in the comments. Here's a few renders so you can better see the end results of my CAD work. The skirt is much thinner than the Mark I model, more like the original. I've designed it to be about 4mm thick. There may still be some tweaking to do, just to refine the parts and add any more details I can find on a final sweep of the photos of the original, but I think I'm almost there. Of course, like my Mark I version, the wings are designed to rotate, and they're linked by a bar that runs between the oval engine and the mine hatch. Slave One can then be displayed either landed or in flight using my original mounting method and stand. In flight is probably the way most of you will choose to display yours, and it really shows Slave One off to its best advantage. You can see all of the underside detail clearly, and even take a peek into the cockpit. The contours of the hull in the CAD model are really smooth, and the panel lines well defined, so the print should be nice and crisp. As you can see, a lot of the panels and panel lines on the shoulders are not symmetrical. There are plenty of instances on Slave One like this, where you have to keep your wits about you. I have deliberately kept the wall thicknesses down to help make printing easier and use less material. The Mark I weighed in at 10 kilos on the stand. Hopefully this will be less. It would be nice to make provision for lighting, something I've not previously explored, but I think it would be a good option if you like what's coming next. I mentioned earlier about the interior. Well, Boba's got to have a way in, so I've designed the boarding ramp to be fitted either up for flight or down for access. Of course, that means the door has to open as well. Well, it does. Probably the biggest influence for the interior is the concept art by Ryan Church, as featured in The Art of the Mandalorian in Season 2. I've tried to combine my cockpit solution and his style to create a viable interior to Slave 1. I hope you like it. With the boarding ramp lowered, the entry door slides up into the tail section above the ramp. On this level, to the left is Boba's armory, and to the right is an onboard carbon freeze chamber with Han in carbonite, awaiting delivery to Jabba. Stairs lead up to the flight deck, where the cockpit rotates to the flight position for Boba, based on my original design. The front cabin is also detailed, as are the interiors of the shoulders. Above the carbon freeze chamber and armory are boxes, stowage and canisters of munitions and supplies. With the main door down in the closed position, the crew can access bunks and washing facilities in the tail before reaching the final compartment for the main guns. One good thing about the Slave 1 concept is that all the engines and support equipment are housed within the lower skirt. This gives a lot of freedom designing the main interior spaces. Here's a view of the rotating cockpit in slightly more detail. We'll start in the landing position with Boba nice and comfy. Boba, his flight console and the seats are then rotated 180 degrees. The unit then tips back 90 degrees to the flight position. I guess this process would happen automatically with Slave 1's takeoff or landing cycle. It would certainly look pretty cool on screen. The full interior gives the adventurous modeler quite a few options. It'd be great to see a cutaway model or even a sectional model with loads more detail added. But in flight is how I think most of us will make Slave 1. So there we are. This is where I'm at. My new Slave 1 will have all of the following features: a working rotating cockpit, working rotating wings, rotating tail cannons, a boarding ramp that can be built in the raised or lowered position and an opening main door, and finally a fully detailed interior including an armory and Han Solo in carbonite. So now you've seen what I've been up to over the past few months, what do you think? This version of Slave 1 is intended not only to be as close to the original model as possible, but to go further. To give you, the modeler, more options of how you build and display your model of Slave 1. But what's next? Well, I now have to break down Slave 1 into component form for 3D printing. Then after test printing and assembly, I shall release the files into the big wide world. They'll then be available to buy securely through my website, Staples and Vine. I have no idea how soon that'll be, as there's still a lot to do. All I can say is that the more merch you buy, the more time I can spend on Slave 1. So please, head over to my store via the link in the description and get some while it's still available. In the next Slave 1 video, you'll see just how Slave 1 is broken down for 3D printing, and how I resolve some of the issues in designing such a big model for printing and assembly. I hope you've enjoyed Project Slave 1. If you have, please share with your friends and make sure you subscribe to my channel. So you catch my next video when it goes live, click on the bell icon. To learn about some of the techniques I use, check out my how-to series to find out more about moulding, casting, CAD design and 3D printing. If you have any questions about Project Slave 1, just leave them in the comments and I'll get back to you. Thanks for watching.